The macabre history of the Eckers. They kept 15 kids off the grid without a single record in the autumn of 1998, when Y2K fears gripped the nation and the internet was still a novelty for most American households. The remote forests of northern Idaho concealed one of the most disturbing cases of systematic child isolation in modern American history. Deep within the Clearwater National Forest, 23 miles from the nearest paved road, the Ecker family had created their own world, a place where 15 children existed without leaving so much as a paper trail in the outside world. Ecker Compound, as investigators would later call it, was located on a 640-acre plot of land that had been purchased in 1979 by Marcus Ecker, a former electronics engineer who had grown increasingly paranoid about government surveillance and social collapse. The property, accessible only by a series of unmarked dirt roads that wound through dense pine forests, was perfectly positioned for someone who wanted to disappear entirely from modern society. Marcus Ecker was a man whose life had been shaped by a combination of genuine technical brilliance and deepening psychological instability. Born in 1952 in suburban Detroit, he had excelled in mathematics and engineering throughout his academic career, eventually earning a degree in electrical engineering from Michigan Tech. His early career in the aerospace industry had exposed him to classified government projects, experiences that had gradually fostered an obsessive belief that federal agencies were conducting widespread surveillance of American citizens. By the mid-1970s, Marcus had become convinced that the United States was heading toward inevitable economic and social collapse, and that only those who could achieve complete self-sufficiency would survive the coming chaos. His wife, Rebecca, had initially been skeptical of his increasingly extreme views, but years of isolation and Marcus's persuasive personality had gradually converted her to his worldview. Rebecca Ecker, born Rebecca Lynn Walsh in 1955, had been a kindergarten teacher when she met Marcus in 1976. Her background in early childhood education would prove crucial to the family's ability to maintain their isolated existence, as she possessed the knowledge necessary to provide basic schooling for the children who would eventually fill their remote compound. The couple's decision to move to the Idaho wilderness in 1979 had been presented to their few remaining friends and family members as a temporary treat from urban life, a chance to live more simply and raise their children away from the negative influences of modern society. What those friends and family members didn't realize was that the Eckers had no intention of ever returning to conventional life. The construction of the Ecker compound had taken place over several years, with Marcus using his engineering skills to design a complex of buildings that could function entirely independently of public utilities and government oversight. The main residence was a large log structure that housed multiple families, while smaller cabins scattered throughout the property provided additional living space and work areas. The compound's infrastructure was a masterpiece of off-grid engineering. Solar panels and wind generators provided electrical power, while a sophisticated water collection and filtration system ensured a reliable supply of clean water. Food production was handled through extensive gardens, livestock operations, and hunting in the surrounding forest. Most importantly, all of these systems were designed to operate without any connection to municipal services or regulatory oversight. By 1982, the Ecker compound was home to the first generation of children who would grow up entirely outside the official record-keeping systems of American society. Marcus and Rebecca's biological children, 3 sons and 2 daughters born between 1980 and 1987, were delivered at the compound by Rebecca herself, with assistance from other women who had joined the community over the years. The expansion of the Ecker family beyond Marcus and Rebecca's biological children began in the mid-1980s, when the couple started taking in women and children who were fleeing abusive relationships or seeking alternative lifestyles. These newcomers, desperate for safety and community, were gradually integrated into the compound's rigid social structure and convinced to abandon their connections to the outside world. The process of acquiring children for the compound was both opportunistic and systematic. Marcus and Rebecca would identify vulnerable families during their frequent trips to nearby towns, offering help and shelter to women with children who appeared to be in crisis. Once these families arrived at the compound, a combination of isolation, psychological manipulation, and the practical difficulties of leaving ensured that most would remain permanently. Some children arrived at the compound as infants or toddlers, brought by mothers who believed they were joining a supportive community. Others came as older children, traumatized by previous experiences and initially grateful for the apparent safety and stability the compound provided. In all cases, the children's previous identities were gradually erased as they were integrated into the Ecker family's carefully constructed alternative reality. The 15 children who called the Ecker compound home by 1998 ranged in age from 3 to 18 years old. None possessed birth certificates, social security numbers, or any other official documentation of their existence. They had never attended public schools, received medical care from licensed physicians, or been counted in any government census or survey. The children's education was provided entirely by Rebecca Ecker and other adults in the compound, using a curriculum that emphasized practical skills, religious instruction, and Marcus's interpretations of history and current events. The children learned to read and write, using carefully selected books that reinforced the family's beliefs about the corruption of mainstream society and the importance of remaining separate from government influence. Medical care for the children was handled internally, with Rebecca serving as the compound's primary healer, using a combination of herbal remedies, basic first aid, and medical supplies that Marcus acquired during his supply runs to distant towns. The children had never received vaccinations, professional medical examinations, or treatment for anything more serious than minor injuries and common illnesses. The psychological control exercised over the children was as sophisticated as the physical isolation that contained them. Marcus had developed a complex ideological framework that portrayed the outside world as fundamentally dangerous and corrupt, while presenting the compound as a blessed sanctuary where true freedom and righteousness could flourish. The children were taught that government agencies were actively seeking to destroy their family and steal them away from their parents. They learned that public schools were institutions designed to brainwash children into accepting government control, and that modern medicine was a conspiracy to poison and weaken the population. Most importantly, they were convinced that their survival depended entirely on maintaining absolute secrecy about their existence and location. Daily life at the compound followed a strict routine designed to maximize self-sufficiency and reinforce social control. The children rose before dawn to tend to livestock and begin their educational activities. Mornings were dedicated to academic instruction, while afternoons involved practical work maintaining the compound's infrastructure and food production systems. Evenings were reserved for religious instruction and community meetings where Marcus would share his interpretations of current events and reinforce the group's ideological foundations. The compound's economy operated entirely outside the conventional financial system. Marcus had accumulated substantial savings during his engineering career, and he supplemented these resources through carefully planned forays into the cash economy. He would travel to distant cities several times per year to sell handcrafted items, purchase supplies, and convert assets into untraceable currency. The children's understanding of the outside world was entirely shaped by Marcus's carefully curated information. They knew that cities existed, but they believed these places were violent, polluted wastelands where people lived in fear and misery. They had heard of technologies like television and computers, but they understood these as tools of government, surveillance, and mind control. The psychological impact of this isolation on the children was profound and varied. The younger children, who had no memories of life outside the compound, accepted their circumstances as normal and natural. However, some of the older children, particularly those who had arrived at the compound with some memory of conventional life, struggled with questions and doubts that they dared not express openly. The compound's social structure was rigidly hierarchical, with Marcus serving as the unquestioned leader and Rebecca as his primary lieutenant. The other adults in the community occupied various roles based on their skills and the length of their residence, while the children were ranked according to age and their perceived loyalty to the family's principles. Discipline within the compound was swift and severe for any child who questioned the established order or expressed curiosity about the outside world. Marcus had developed a system of punishments that included isolation, reduction of food privileges, and intensive ideological re-education sessions, designed to eliminate dangerous thoughts and reinforce proper attitudes. The children's social development was severely restricted by their isolation from peers outside the compound. Their only companions were their siblings and the other children in the community, all of whom had been raised with the same beliefs and restrictions. They had no frame of reference for normal childhood experiences like birthday parties, holidays celebrated with extended family, or friendships with children from different backgrounds. As the 1990s progressed, several factors began to threaten the stability of the Ecker compound's carefully maintained isolation. Advances in satellite technology and geographical information systems made it increasingly difficult to remain completely hidden from government oversight. Changes in federal regulations regarding land use and environmental protection brought new scrutiny to remote properties that had previously operated without interference. More importantly, some of the older children were beginning to reach an age where their absence from official records was becoming increasingly problematic. The compound's complete avoidance of the social security system meant that these young adults had no legal identity and no way to participate in conventional society, even if they chose to leave. The psychological pressure of maintaining the compound's secrets was also taking its toll on some community members. The constant vigilance required to avoid detection, combined with the stress of raising children in complete isolation, was creating tensions within the group that Marcus's authoritarian leadership was struggling to contain. By 1998, the Ecker compound represented a unique experiment in social control and ideological isolation that had succeeded far longer than anyone could have predicted. However, the forces that would eventually expose their hidden world were already gathering momentum, and the children who had spent their entire lives off the grid were about to discover that complete invisibility from modern society was ultimately impossible to maintain. The stage was set for discovery that would shock law enforcement officials, social workers, and child psychologists, while raising profound questions about the rights of parents to control their children's access to the broader world and the responsibility of society to protect children from even well-intentioned forms of abuse. The beginning of the end for the Ecker compound's 20-year isolation came from an unexpected source: a routine environmental survey conducted by the U.S. Forest Service in the summer of 1998. Dr. Lisa Chun, a wildlife biologist conducting a study of old-growth forest ecosystems, had been using GPS technology and aerial photography to map previously uncharted areas of the Clearwater National Forest, when she discovered evidence of significant human habitation in an area that was supposed to be uninhabited wilderness. Aerial photographs revealed not just one or two structures, but an entire complex of buildings, gardens, and infrastructure that suggested a substantial permanent settlement. Solar panels glinted in the sunlight. Cleared areas showed evidence of extensive agriculture, and smoke from multiple chimneys indicated active occupation by a considerable number of people. Dr. Chun's discovery was particularly alarming because the area in question was technically within the boundaries of the national forest. though the Ecker property's legal status was complicated by overlapping jurisdictions and outdated survey maps. More importantly, the existence of such a large settlement without any permits or official notification represented a potential violation of numerous federal environmental and safety regulations. The Forest Service's initial response was cautious and bureaucratic. Regional Supervisor James Patterson ordered a ground survey to assess the situation and determine whether the settlement represented a genuine threat to the forest ecosystem, or simply a case of outdated paperwork and jurisdictional confusion. However, the team assigned to conduct this survey would discover something far more disturbing than environmental violations. Forest Service Ranger Michael Torres, accompanied by Environmental Compliance Officer Sarah Kim, approached the Ecker compound on the morning of September 14, 1998. Their mission was simply to establish contact with the residents, determine the legal status of the settlement, and assess any environmental impact from the community's activities. The Rangers' first indication that something was seriously wrong came when they encountered the compound's perimeter security. The property was surrounded by sophisticated motion detectors, hidden cameras, and warning systems that seemed far more elaborate than necessary for a simple homesteading operation. More troubling still, the adults who eventually emerged to meet them displayed a level of paranoia and hostility that suggested they had something significant to hide. Marcus Ecker's confrontation with the Forest Service officials was tense and revealing. While he attempted to maintain a facade of cooperation, his explanations for the compound's existence were inconsistent and evasive. He claimed to have proper documentation for the settlement, but was unable to produce any permits or legal authorizations. When requested, more disturbing to the Rangers was Marcus's obvious attempt to prevent them from seeing or speaking with the numerous children, whose presence was evident throughout the compound. When Ranger Torres asked about the educational arrangements for the children, Marcus became increasingly agitated and insisted that all family matters were private and beyond the jurisdiction of federal authorities. The turning point in the investigation came when Officer Kim noticed a teenage girl watching the proceedings from behind one of the buildings. When she attempted to approach the girl to ask basic questions about her welfare, Marcus physically intervened and ordered the child to return to her duties. The girl's reaction, a look of desperate curiosity followed by obvious fear, convinced Kim that the situation warranted immediate escalation to child welfare authorities. The Forest Service officials left the compound that day with more questions than answers, but they carried with them a growing conviction that the Ecker settlement represented something far more serious than environmental violations. Their report to federal authorities detailed not only the lack of proper permits and documentation, but also their concerns about the welfare of the numerous children living in complete isolation from normal society. The investigation that followed involved multiple federal and state agencies, each bringing different areas of expertise and legal authority to bear on the complex situation. The FBI became involved due to potential federal crimes related to child welfare and document fraud. Idaho State Police contributed knowledge of local jurisdiction and family services protocols. The Department of Health and Human Services provided expertise in child protection and family assessment. The challenge facing investigators was unprecedented in American law enforcement. They were dealing with 15 children who had no legal existence in any government database, no educational records, no medical histories, and no official documentation of their identities or family relationships. The legal and practical questions raised by their situation would require months of careful investigation and analysis. The children's reactions to their first sustained contact with outside authorities revealed the depth of their psychological conditioning and isolation. The younger children were terrified of the strangers and clung desperately to the adults they knew. The older children displayed a mixture of curiosity and suspicion that suggested they had been warned extensively about the dangers of government contact. Initial interviews with the children were conducted by specially trained child psychologists who understood the unique challenges of working with victims of extreme isolation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in cult deprogramming and child trauma, led a team of professionals who spent weeks gaining the children's trust and gradually learning about their experiences within the compound. The children's accounts painted a picture of systematic psychological control that was as sophisticated as any recognized cult or extremist organization. They had been taught to believe that their survival depended on absolute obedience to Marcus and Rebecca, and that any contact with outside authorities would result in their separation, imprisonment, or worse. The educational assessment of the children revealed significant gaps in their knowledge and development. While some had achieved remarkable proficiency in practical skills like agriculture, construction, and basic academics, they were completely ignorant of contemporary society, technology, and social norms. None had ever used a telephone, watched television, or interacted with children outside their isolated community. Medical examinations of the children uncovered serious health issues that had gone untreated for years. Several suffered from preventable diseases that could have been easily addressed with routine medical care. Others showed signs of malnutrition or developmental delays that suggested inadequate health care during critical growth periods. Most troubling of all, none had received any of the standard childhood vaccinations that are considered essential for public health. The legal process of establishing the children's identities proved to be extraordinarily complex. With no birth certificates or other documentation, authorities had to rely on DNA testing, dental records, and extensive investigation to determine the children's ages, family relationships, and potential connections to missing persons cases from other states. This investigation revealed that several of the children had been reported missing from other states years earlier, though the cases had long since gone cold due to lack of leads. Other children appeared to have been born at the compound to women who had themselves disappeared from conventional society, making the determination of parental rights and custody extremely complicated. The psychological evaluation of Marcus and Rebecca Ecker revealed the full extent of their manipulation and control over the compound's residents. Both displayed symptoms of paranoid personality disorder and delusional thinking that had intensified over years of isolation. Their belief system had evolved into a comprehensive alternate reality that justified any action taken to protect their family from outside interference. The dismantling of the Ecker compound required careful coordination between multiple agencies and specialists. Child welfare workers had to develop individualized plans for each of the 15 children, taking into account their ages, psychological conditions, and potential family connections. The transition from complete isolation to integration into mainstream society would prove to be a lengthy and challenging process. The older children faced particular difficulties in adapting to a world they had been taught to fear and distrust. Several required months of intensive therapy and gradual exposure to normal social situations before they could begin to function in conventional educational or work environments. The younger children, while more adaptable, still struggled with basic concepts like formal schooling, medical care, and social interaction with peers. The legal proceedings against Marcus and Rebecca Ecker involved charges that ranged from child endangerment and educational neglect to document fraud and conspiracy. The complexity of the case, combined with the unique circumstances of the children's isolation, made prosecution challenging and resulted in plea agreements that emphasized rehabilitation and family reunification where possible. The impact of the Ecker case extended far beyond the immediate family involved. Child welfare agencies across the country reviewed their procedures for detecting and investigating cases of extreme isolation or off-grid communities. Educational authorities developed new protocols for assessing and integrating children who had been raised outside conventional schooling systems. The case also raised important questions about the balance between parental rights and child welfare, particularly in cases where parents sincerely believe they are protecting their children from harmful influences. Legal scholars and family court judges struggled with the challenge of distinguishing between legitimate, alternative lifestyles and harmful isolation that deprives children of essential opportunities for development and socialization. Follow-up. Studies of the Ecker children revealed varying degrees of success in their integration into mainstream society. Some of the younger children adapted remarkably well and went on to achieve academic and professional success. However, others continued to struggle with social anxiety, trust issues, and difficulty forming relationships outside their original family unit. The compound itself was eventually dismantled and the land returned to its natural state. But the legacy of the Ecker case continued to influence child welfare policy and law enforcement training for years afterward. The case became a landmark example of how modern technology and interagency cooperation could uncover even the most carefully hidden instances of child abuse and neglect. The 15 children who had spent their entire lives off the grid became living proof of both human resilience and the importance of societal protections for vulnerable individuals. Their eventual emergence into the modern world, while traumatic and challenging, demonstrated that even the most systematic attempts to isolate children from mainstream society could not completely extinguish their fundamental human potential for growth, learning, and adaptation. The macabre history of the Ecker family serves as a reminder that the most dangerous forms of child abuse are often those that are carried out with genuine conviction and presented as acts of love and protection. The case continues to inform our understanding of how isolation, manipulation, and psychological control can be used to harm children even when physical violence is absent, and why society must remain vigilant in protecting the rights and welfare of all children, regardless of their family circumstances. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,